Okay, so page 85 here. An icy wind was blowing violently, but we marched without faltering. The SS had made us increase our pace. Faster, you tramps, you flea-ridden dogs. Why not? Moving fast made us a little warmer. The blood flowed more readily in our veins. We had the feeling of being alive. Faster, you filthy dogs. We were no longer marching. We were running like automatons. The SS were running as well, weapons in hands. We looked as though we were running from them. The night was pitch black. And from time to time, a shot exploded in the darkness. They had orders to shoot anyone who could not sustain the pace. Their fingers on the triggers, they did not deprive themselves of the pleasure. If one of us stopped for a second, a quick shot eliminated the filthy dog. So just like before, where your only value was you work or you die. Now what we see is you run or you die. If you slow down, if you stop, they will shoot you on sight without hesitation. So I was putting one foot in front of the other, like a machine. I was dragging this emancipated body that it was still such a weight. If only I could have shed it. Though I tried to put it out of my mind, I couldn't help thinking that there were two of us, my body and I hated my body. I kept repeating to myself. So what does this mean is, again, he realizes his body is weak. He's fresh out of surgery, a foot surgery at that. So, he might have the will to keep running. He might have the will to survive, but his body might not handle it. Don't think, don't stop, run. Near me, men were collapsing into the dirty snow. Gunshots. A young boy from Poland was marching beside me. His name was Zalman, and he had worked in the electrical material depot in Buna. People mocked him because he was forever praying or meditating on some Talmudic question. For him, it was an escape from reality, from feeling the blows. And all of a sudden, he had terrible stomach cramps. My stomach aches, he whispered to me. He couldn't go on. He had to stop a moment, and I begged him. Wait a little, Zalman. Soon we will all come to a halt. We cannot run like this to the end of the world. But while running, he began to undo his buttons and yelled to me, I can't go on. My stomach is bursting. Make an effort, Zalman. Try. I can't go on. He lowered his pants and fell to the ground. That is the image I have of him. I don't believe that he was finished off by an SS, for nobody had noticed. He must have died, trampled under the feet of the thousands of men who followed us. I soon forgot him. I began to think of myself again. My foot was aching. I shivered with every step. It is winter. He is barefoot. He has just had surgery. He spent a year in a concentration camp. Just a few more meters and it will be over. I'll fall. A small red flame, a shot. Death enveloped me. It suffocated me. It stuck to me like glue. I felt I could touch it. The idea of dying, of ceasing to be, began to fascinate me, to no longer exist, to no longer feel the excruciating pain of my foot, to no longer feel in anything, neither fatigue nor cold, to break rank, to let myself slide to the side of the road. My father's presence was the only thing that stopped me. He was running next to me, out of breath, out of strength, desperate. I had no right to let myself die. What would he do without me? I was his sole support. So what would he do without me, right? The only reason they're both still going at this point is for each other. These thoughts were going through my mind as I continued to run, not feeling my numb foot, not even realizing that I was still running, that I still owned a body that galloped down the road among thousands of others. When I became conscious of myself again, I tried to slow my pace somewhat, but there was no way. These human waves were rolling forward and it would have crushed me like an ant. By now, I moved like a sleepwalker. I sometimes closed my eyes and it was like running while asleep. Now and then, someone violently kicked me from behind, and I would wake up. The man in the back of me was screaming, run faster. If you don't want to move, let us pass you. But all I had to do was close my eyes to see a whole world pass before me, to dream another life. The road was endless, to allow oneself to be carried by the mob, to be swept away with blind fate. When the SS retired, they were replaced, but no one replaced us. Chilled to the bone, our throats parched, famished, out of breath, we pressed on. We were masters of nature and masters of the world. We had transcended everything, death, fatigue, our natural needs. We were stronger than cold and hunger, stronger than the guns and the desire to die. Doomed and rootless, nothing but numbers. We were the only men on earth. At last, the morning star appeared in the gray sky. A hesitant light began to flicker on the horizon. We were exhausted. We had lost all strength and illusion. The commandant had announced that we'd already covered 20 kilometers since we left. Long since we had exceeded the limits of our fatigue. Our legs moved mechanically, in spite of us, without us. So they have ran 20 kilometers. For context, that is a half of a marathon. They have ran a half of a marathon after going through at least a year in a concentration camp. Some of these people have been there for years. They've essentially starved to death. And again, like it takes a long time to train for that in good physical condition with modern science. So you have to think, like, again, this is what you will do if your only other option is death. You run or you die, and this is how far you can go. And they're only halfway there. We came to an abandoned village, and not a living soul, not a single bark. Houses with gaping windows. A few people slipped out of the ranks, hoping to hide in some abandoned building. One more hour of marching, and at last, the order to halt. As one man, we let ourselves sink in the snow. My father shook me. Not here. Get up. A little further down. There's a shed over there. Come. I had neither the desire nor the resolve to get up, yet I obeyed. It was not really a shed, but a brick factory whose roof had fallen in. The window panes were shattered, its wall covered in soot, and it was not easy to get inside. Hundreds of prisoners jostled one another at the door. We finally succeeded in entering too. Inside, too, the snow was thick. I let myself slide to the ground, and only now did I feel the full extent of my weakness. The snow seemed to me like a very soft and very warm carpet. I fell asleep, and I don't know how long I fell asleep. A few minutes or 1 hour, and when I woke up, a frigid hand was tapping my cheek. I tried to open my eyes, and it was my father. How he had aged since last night. My father was completely twisted and shriveled up into himself. His eyes were glazed over, his lips parched, decayed. Everything about him now just expressed total exhaustion. His voice was damp from tears and snow. Don't let yourself be overcome by sleep, Eliza. It is dangerous to fall asleep in the snow. One falls asleep forever. Come, my son, come, get up. Get up, how could I? How could I leave this warm blanket? I was hearing my father's words, but the meaning escaped me, as if he had asked me to carry the entire shed on my arms. Again, so he's asking, so in Eliza's perspective here, this is an undoable task, right? It's undoable as you'll lift this entire shed up over your head. And he's asking him to just get up, right? That is how exhausted he is. Come, my son, come. I got up with clenched teeth. Holding on to me with one arm, he led me outside. It was not easy. It was as difficult to go out as to come in. Beneath our feet there lay men, crushed, trampled, underfoot, dying. Nobody paid attention to them. We were outside, and the icy wind whipped my face. I was constantly biting my lips so that they wouldn't freeze. All around me, what appeared to be a dance of death. My head was reeling, and I was walking through a cemetery. Among the stiffened corpses, they were logs of wood. So we're seeing lots of literary devices here. Not a sound of distress, not a plaintive cry, nothing but a mass of agony and silence. Nobody asked anyone for help. One died because one had to. There was no point in making trouble. I saw myself in every stiffened corpse. Soon I wouldn't even be seeing them. I would be one of them. It was a matter of hours. Come, father, let's go back to the shed. He didn't answer. He was not even looking at the dead. Come, father, it's better there. You'll be able to lie down. We'll take turns. I'll watch over you and you'll watch over me. We won't let each other fall asleep. We'll look after each other. He accepted. After trampling over so many bodies and corpses, we succeeded in getting inside, and we let ourselves fall to the ground. Don't worry, son. Go to sleep. I'll watch over you. You first, father. Sleep. He refused. I stretched out and tried to sleep, to doze a little, but it was in vain. God knows what I would have given to be able to sleep a few moments. But deep inside, I knew that to sleep meant to die. And something in me rebelled against that death. Death, which was settling all around me, silently, gently. It would seize upon a sleeping person, steal into him, and devour him bit by bit. Next to me, someone was trying to awaken his neighbor, his brother, perhaps, or even his comrade. In vain, defeated, he lay down too, next to the corpse, and also fell asleep. Who would wake him up? Reaching out with my arm, I touched him. Wake up, one mustn't fall asleep here. He half opened his eyes. No advice, he said, his voice a whisper. I'm exhausted. Mind your business, leave me alone. My father, too, was gently dozing. I couldn't see his eyes. His cap was covering his face. Wake up, I whispered in his ear, and he awoke with a start. He sat up, bewildered, stunned, like an orphan. He looked all around him, taking it all in, as if he had suddenly decided to make an inventory of the universe, to determine where he was and how and why he was there. And then he smiled. I shall always remember that smile. What world did it come from? Again, so his father's smiling when he's like kind of at the end of it all, right? They are both moments from death. They both suffered through hell, and his dad smiled. Heavy snow continued to fall over the corpses, and the door of the shed opened, and an old man appeared. His mustache was covered in ice. His lips were blue, and it was Rabbi Eliyahu. So Rabbi Eliyahu is going to be an important character for the rest of the little book here, just as a side note there. So it was Rabbi Eliyahu, who had headed a small congregation in Poland, a very kind man, beloved by everyone in the camp, even by the capos and the blocktistes. Despite the orders and the deprivations, his face continued to radiate his innocence. He was the only rabbi who nobody ever failed to address as rabbi in Buna. He looked like one of the prophets, those prophets of old, always in the midst of his people whenever they needed to be consoled. And strangely, his words never provoked anyone. They did bring peace. As he entered the shed, his eyes, brighter than ever, seemed to be searching for someone. Perhaps someone here has seen my son. He had lost his son in the commotion. He had searched for him among the dying to no avail. Then he dug through the snow to find his body in vain. For 3 years, they had stayed close to one another. Side by side, they endured the suffering, the blows. They had waited for their ration of bread, and they had prayed. 3 years, from camp to camp, from selection to selection. And now, when the end seemed near, fate had separated them. When he came near me, Rabbi Eliyahu whispered, "It happened on the road. We lost sight of one another during the journey. I fell behind a little at the rear of the column. I didn't have the strength to run anymore, and my son didn't notice. That's all I know. Where has he disappeared? Where can I find him? Perhaps you've seen him somewhere?" "No, Rabbi Eliyahu, I have not seen him." And so he left, and as he had come, a shadow swept away by the wind. He had already gone through the door when I remembered that I had noticed his son running beside me. I had forgotten, and so had not mentioned it to Rabbi Eliyahu. But then I remembered something else. His son had seen him losing ground, sliding back to the rear of the column. He had seen him, and he had continued to run in front, letting the distance between them grow greater. A terrible thought crossed my mind. What if he had wanted to get rid of his father? He had felt his father growing weaker and, believing that the end was near, had thought by this separation to free himself of a burden that could diminish his own chance for survival. Again, so they suffered through that for 3 years, and he's guessing that his son abandoned his father intentionally. It was good that I had forgotten all that. I was glad that Rabbi Eliyahu had continued to search for his beloved son. And in spite of myself, a former prayer inside me, a prayer to this God in whom I no longer believed. "Oh God, master of the universe, give me the strength to never do what Rabbi Eliyahu's son has done." There was shouting outside and in the courtyard. Night had fallen, and the SS were ordering us to form ranks. We started to march once more. The dead remained in the yard, under the snow without even a marker, like fallen guards. No one recited Kaddish, the death prayer, over them. Sons abandoned the remains of their fathers without a tear. And again, that last paragraph kind of perfectly summarized it, right? You have to survive. That's just it. If you walter here, you'll fall immediately. Waver here, sorry. On the road, it snowed and snowed, and it snowed endlessly. We were marching more slowly. Even the guards seemed tired. My wounded foot no longer hurt, probably frozen. I felt that I had lost that foot. It had become detached from me, like a wheel fallen off from the car. Never mind, I had to accept the fact I would have to live with only one leg. The important thing was to not dwell on it, especially now. Leave those thoughts for later. Our column had lost all appearances of discipline. Everyone walked as he wished, as he could. No more gunshots. Our guards surely were tired. But death hardly needed their help. The cold was conscientiously doing its work. At every step, someone fell down and ceased to suffer. From time to time, SS officers on motorcycles drove the length of the column to shake off the growing apathy. Hold on, we're almost there. Courage, just a few more hours. We're arriving in Gleiwitz. These words of encouragement, even coming from as they did from the mouths of our assassins, were of great help. Nobody wanted to give up now, just before the end, so close to our destination. Our eyes searched for the horizon for the barbed wire of Gleiwitz. Our only wish was to arrive there quickly. By now it was night. It had stopped snowing, and we had marched a few more hours before we arrived. We saw the camp only when we stood in front of its gate. The capos quickly settled us into the barrack, and there was shoving and jostling as if it was the ultimate haven, the gateway to life. People trod over numbed bodies, trampled wounded faces. There were no cries, only a few moans. My father and I were thrown to the ground by this desperate tide, and from beneath me came a desperate cry. You're crushing me, have mercy. The voice was familiar. You're crushing me, mercy, have mercy. The same faint voice, the same cry I had heard somewhere before. This voice had spoken to me one day. When? Years ago? No, it must have been in the camp. Mercy. Knowing that I was crushing him, preventing him from breathing, I wanted to get up and disengage myself to allow him to breathe. But I myself was crushed under the weight of the bodies. I had difficulty breathing. I dug my nails into unknown faces. I was biting my way through, searching for air. No one cried out. Suddenly, I remembered. Juliek, the boy from Warsaw who had played the violin in the Buna Orchestra. Juliek, is that you? Eliza, the 25 whiplashes. Yes, I remember. He fell silent, and a long moment went by. Juliek, can you hear me, Juliek? Yes, he said feebly. What do you want? He was not dead. Are you all right, Juliek? I asked. Less to know his answer than to hear him speak, to know he was alive. All right, Eliza, all right. Not too much air. Tired. My feet are swollen. It's good to rest, but my violin. I thought he'd lost his mind. His violin. Here? What about your violin? He was gasping. I'm afraid they'll break my violin. I brought it with me. Again, like why would you bring your violin through this? It's a run for your life. This is not his dad. No, this is just someone he's met in the camp. I could not answer him. Someone had lain down on top of me, smothering me. I couldn't breathe through my mouth or my nose, and sweat was running down my forehead and my back. This was it, the end of the road, a silent death, suffocation. No way to scream, to call for help. I tried to rid myself of my invisible assassin. My whole desire to live became concentrated in my nails. I scratched. I fought for a breath of air. I tore at decaying flesh that did not respond. I could not free myself of that mass weighing down on my chest. Who knows? Was I struggling with a dead man? I shall never know. All I can say is that I prevailed. I succeeded in digging a hole through that wall of dead and dying people, a small hole with which I could drink a little air. And this is something that's if you've ever gone to like really big concerts, you'll know there's barriers in place. This is to prevent that. You can, if there's enough people in a certain area, you do actually crush like dozens of people to death. It's a very real thing. So, Father, are you there? I asked as soon as I was able to utter a word. I knew that he could not be far from me. Yes, a voice replied from far away, as if from another world. I'm trying to sleep. He was trying to sleep. Could one fall asleep here? Wasn't it dangerous to lower one guard even for a moment when death could strike at any time? These are my thoughts when I heard the sound of a violin, the violin in a dark barrack where the dead were piled on top of the living. Who was this madman who played the violin here at the edge of his own grave? Or was it a hallucination? And it had to be Juliek. He was playing a fragment of a Beethoven concerto. I had never heard such a beautiful sound in such silence. How had he succeeded in disengaging himself to slip out from under my body without my feeling it? The darkness enveloped us, and all I could hear was the violin, as if it was Juliek's soul had become his bow. He was playing his life. His whole being was gliding over the strings, his unfulfilled hopes, his charred past, his extinguished future. He played that which he would never play again. I shall never forget Juliek. How could I forget this concert, given before an audience of the dead and the dying? Even today, when I hear that particular piece of Beethoven, my eyes close, and out of the darkness emerges the pale and melancholy face of my Polish comrade, bidding farewell to an audience of dying men. I don't know how long he played. I was overcome by sleep. And when I woke at daybreak, I saw Juliet facing me, hunched over, dead. Next to him lay his violin, trampled, an eerily poignant little corpse.
So he actually did have a violin?
He actually did have a violin, yeah. And again, that's one of the points where people argue like insanity. Like, again, they're running a marathon here, a literal marathon in winter.
Reminds me of that one scene in 1917 when Harry War and the one guy that's singing to the soldiers.
Yeah, there's the Titanic scene, like the violin one as they go down. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was just like his final piece, right? Like this could be something you write about as well, like even something like that about why he chose to bring his violin, why he chose to play it, but yeah. So page 95. We had stayed in Gleitwitz for 3 days without food or water. We were forbidden to leave the barracks, and the door was guarded by the SS. Again, they ran a marathon in winter when they were starved to death and worked to death, and then they didn't get food or water for 3 days. So you can imagine, out of 10,000 people who started this journey, just how few are going to survive this. I was hungry and thirsty, and I must have looked like very dirty and disheveled, to judge by what the others looked like. The bread we had brought from Buna had been devoured long since, and who knew when we would be given another ration? The front followed us. We could hear the cannons again very close by, but we no longer had the strength or the courage to think that the Germans would run out of time, that the Russians would reach us before we evacuated. We learned that we would be moved to the center of Germany. On the third day at dawn, we were driven out of the barracks. We threw blankets over our shoulders like prayer shawls. We were directed to a gate that divided the camp in two, and a group of SS officers that stood waiting. A word flew through our ranks: selection. The SS officers were doing the selection, the weak to the left, those who walked well to the right. My father was sent to the left, and I ran after him, and an SS officer shouted at my back, "Come back." I inched my way through the crowd. Several SS men rushed to find me, creating such confusion that a number of people were able to switch over to the right, among them my father and I. Still, there were gunshots and some dead. So again, they have now gone through another selection, and they failed, but they were able to sneak by. We were led out of the camp, and after a half-hour march, we arrived in the very middle of a field crossed by railroad tracks. This was where we were to wait for the train's arrival. Snow was falling heavily, and we were forbidden to sit down or to move. A thick layer of snow was accumulating on our blankets. We were given bread, the usual ration. We threw ourselves on it. Someone had the idea of quenching his thirst by eating snow, and soon we were all imitating him. As we were not permitted to bend down, we took out spoons and ate the snow off each other's backs. A mouthful of bread and a spoonful of snow. The SS men who were watching were greatly amused by the spectacle. The hours went by, and our eyes were tired from starving at the horizon, waiting for the liberating train to appear. It arrived only very late that evening, an infinitely long train composed of roofless cattle cars. The SS shoved us inside, 100 per car. We were so skinny. If you recall, they arrived at 80. When everyone was on board, the convoy left.
I don't understand why the Germans wanted to just keep them in the outside world was closing in on them. Like, just let them go and retreat by themselves. Why were they trying to take them back?
I'm not 100% certain as to why. Like the German plan at this point was to kill every Jew. It could be that there's only so much ammo and stuff. It could be that they were moving them to try and continue on with that plan. They might not have had enough ammo or men or time to actually exterminate everyone right then and there. Well, yes. Honestly, yeah. There's 10,000 of them. They 100% could have. But so this entire, yeah. But so this entire chapter here is just about how far you can get pushed to your limitations to survive. Again, like really think about it. It is a marathon in winter. They are barefoot. They've been worked to death and starved to death for literal years. And so many of them made it past. And then they were starved and dehydrated for 3 days after the fact. And then they had to stand in the snow while it's still snowing on them. Like there is, it's hard to describe just how much harder you can push someone to live. By rights, every one of them should have died during the scourge, and a lot did survive through it. So that's the entire point of that chapter, is how hard you're willing to fight for your survival. So the chapter is going to be very short from now on. We got about 20 pages left. So chapter 7, second. Press tightly against one another in an effort to resist the cold. Our heads empty, and our brain a whirlwind of decaying memories. Our minds numb with indifference. Here or elsewhere, what did it matter? Die today or tomorrow or later. The night was growing longer, never ended. When at last the grayish light appeared on the horizon, it revealed a tangle of human shapes, heads sunk deeply between the shoulders, crouching, piled on top of each other, like a cemetery covered in snow. And in the early dawn light, I tried to distinguish between the living and those who were no more, but there was barely a difference. My gaze remained fixed on someone who, eyes wide open, stared into space, his colorless face covered with a layer of frost and snow. My father had eluded me, had huddled near me, draped in his blanket, shoulders laden with snow. And what if he were dead as well? I called out to him, and no response. I would have screamed if I could have. He was not moving. Suddenly, the evidence overwhelmed me. There was no longer any reason to live, any reason to fight. The train stopped in an empty field. The abrupt halt had wakened a few sleepers. They stood, looking around, startled. Outside, the SS walked by, shouting, "Throw out all the dead, outside all the corpses." So again, I want to emphasize this number. They start with 100 of them in this train, and that is a fraction of those who survived this journey to the train. So outside, all the corpses and the living were glad. They would have more room. Volunteers began the task. They touched those who remained on the ground. "Here's one, take him." The volunteers undressed him and eagerly grabbed his garments. Then 2 gravediggers grabbed him by the head and feet and threw him out like a wagon, from the wagon, like a sack of flour. And again, think about how they're treating each other. These are their friends, their neighbors, people they've been with in the same block for years, and this is how they're treating each other. They were shouting all around, come on, here's another, my neighbor is not moving." I woke from my apathy only when the 2 men approached my father. I threw myself on his body, and he was cold. I slapped him. I rubbed his hands, crying, Father, wake up. They're going to throw you outside." His body remained inert. 2 gravediggers had grabbed me by the neck. "Leave him alone. Can't you see he's dead?" "No," I yelled. "He's not dead, not yet." And I started to hit him harder and harder. And at last, my father half opened his eyes, and they were glassy. He was breathing faintly. "You see," I cried, and the 2 men went away. 20 corpses were thrown from her wagon, and the train resumed its journey, leaving in its wake, in a snowy field in Poland, hundreds of naked orphans without a tomb. So they go from 100 to 80.
Remember the 80 on the train?
Yeah, so they threw out 20. So 20 people died so far on the journey. There will be more. We received no food. We lived on snow, and it took the place of bread. The day resembled the nights, and the nights left in our souls the dregs of darkness. The train rolled slowly, often halted for a few hours, and continued. It never stopped snowing. We remained lying on the floor for days and nights, one on top of each other, never uttering a word. We were nothing but frozen bodies, our eyes closed. We merely waited for the next stop to unload our dead. There followed days and nights of traveling. Occasionally, we would pass through German towns very early in the morning. German laborers going to work. They would stop and look at us without surprise. Again, without surprise. They knew what was happening. One day, when we had come to a stop, a worker took a piece of bread out of his bag and threw it into a wagon. There was a stampede. Dozens of starving men fought desperately over a few crumbs. The worker watched the spectacle with great interest. Again, think about if you're at the zoo and you throw a piece of meat in like 400 lines, right? You're like laughing at the spectacle. At this point, the Jews in this case are looked at as nothing more than animals. It's amusing to them that they throw a piece of bread in there and people will kill each other for it. It's like a zoo. Years later, I witnessed a similar spectacle in Aden. Our ship's passenger amused themselves by throwing coins to the natives who dove to retrieve them. An elegant Parisian lady took great pleasure in this game. And when I noticed two children desperately fighting in the water, one trying to strangle the other, I implored the lady, please do not throw any more coins. Why not? She said, I like to give charity. In the wagon where the bread had landed, a battle had ensued. Men were hurling themselves at each other, trampling, tearing at it, and mauling each other. Beasts of prey unleashed, animal hate in their eye. An extraordinary vitality possessed them, sharpening their nails and teeth. Again, these are people who are on the edge of death, and now all of a sudden they have all this energy, right, to get this bread. A crowd of workmen and curious passerbys had formed all on the train. They had undoubtedly never seen a train with this kind of cargo. Soon, pieces of bread were falling into the wagon from all sides, and the spectators observed these emancipated creatures ready to kill for a crust of bread. Peace fell into our wagon, and I decided not to move. Anyway, I knew that I would not be strong enough to fight off dozens of violent men. I saw, not far from me, an old man dragging himself on all fours. He had just detached himself from the struggling mob, and he was holding one hand to his heart. At first, I thought he received a blow to his chest, but then I understood. He was hiding a piece of bread under his shirt. With lightning speed, he pulled it up and put it to his mouth. His eyes lit up. A smile, like a grimace, illuminated his ashen face. He was immediately extinguished. A shadow had lain down beside him, and the shadow threw itself over him. Stunned by the blows, the old man was crying. And this is a really big one here. So again, the old man had someone start attacking him. Mir, my little Mir, don't you recognize me? You're killing your father. I have bread for you too, for you too. And he collapsed, but his fist was still clutching a small crust. He had wanted to raise it to his mouth, but the other threw himself on him. The old man mumbled something, groaned, and died. Nobody cared. His son searched for him, took the crust of bread, and began to devour it. He didn't get far. So a son killed his dad for a little piece of bread. Two men had been watching him. They jumped him, and others joined in. When they withdrew, there were two dead bodies next to me, the father and the son. I was 16. In our wagon was a friend of my father's, Mir Katz. He had worked as a gardener in Buna and from time to time had brought us some green vegetables. Less undernourished than the rest of us, the tension had been easier on him. Because he was stronger than most of us, he had been put in charge of our wagon. And on the third night of the journey, I woke up with a start when I felt two hands on my throat, trying to strangle me. I barely had time to call out, Father. Just that one word. I was suffocating, but my father had awakened and grabbed my aggressor. Too weak to overwhelm him, he thought of calling Mir Katz. Come quickly, someone is strangling my son. In a few moments, I was freed. I never did find out why this stranger had wanted to strangle me. But days later, Mir Katz told my father, Shlomo, I am getting weak. My strength is gone. I won't make it. Don't give in, my father tried to encourage him. You must resist. Don't lose faith in yourself. But Mir Katz only groaned in response. I can't go on, Shlomo. I can't help it. I can't go on. My father took his arm, and Mir Katz, the strong one, the sturdiest of us all, began to cry. His son had been taken from him during the first selection, but only now was he crying for him. Only now did he fall apart. He could not go on. He had reached the end. On the last day of our journey, On the last day of our journey, a terrible wind began to blow, and the snow kept falling. We sensed that the end was near, the real end. We could not hold out long in this glacial wind, this storm. Somebody got up and yelled, "We must not remain sitting. We shall freeze to death. Let us get up and move." And we all got up. We all pulled our soaked blankets tighter around our shoulders, and we tried to take a few steps to shuffle back and forth in place. And suddenly a cry arose in the wagon, the cry of a wounded animal. Someone had just died. Others, close to death, imitated his cry, and their cries seemed to come from beyond the graves. Soon everybody was crying, groaning, moaning, cries of distress hurled in the wind and the snow. The lament spread from wagon to wagon. It was contagious. And now hundreds of cries rose at once, the death rattle of an entire convoy with the end approaching. All boundaries had been crossed. Nobody had any strength left, and the night seemed endless. Mere Katz was moaning. Why don't they just shoot us now? That same night, we reached our final destination. The guards came to unload us. The dead were left in their wagons. Only those who could stand could leave. Mere Katz remained on the train. The last day had been the most lethal. We had been 100 or so in this wagon. 12 of us left it. Among them, my father and myself. And we arrived in Buchenwald. So again, after that incredible hell of a journey to get to the train, only 10% of them survived the train. So now we're on chapter 8, page 104. 10 o'clock, okay. At the entrance to the camp, SS officers were waiting for us. We were counted, and then we were directed into the Appelplatz. The orders were given over the loudspeaker. Form ranks of 5, groups of 100, 5 steps forward. Very close to us stood the tall chimney of the crematorium surface. It no longer impressed us. It barely drew our attention. A veteran of Buchenwald told us that we would be taken a shower and afterwards would be sent to different blocks. The idea of a hot shower fascinated me, but my father didn't say a word. He was breathing heavily beside me. Father, I said, just another moment. Soon we'll be able to lie down. You'll be able to rest. He didn't answer. I myself was so weary that his silence left me indifferent. My only wish was to take the shower as soon as possible and to lie down on a cot. Only it wasn't easy to reach the showers. Hundreds of prisoners crowded the areas. The guards seemed unable to restore order. They were lashing out left and right to no avail. Some prisoners who didn't have the strength to jostle or even to stand sat down in the snow. My father wanted to do the same. He was moaning, I can't anymore. It's over. I shall die right here. He dragged me towards a pile of snow which protruded human shapes, torn blankets. Leave me, he said. I can't go on anymore. Have pity for me. I'll wait here until we can go into the showers. You'll come and get me. I could have screamed in anger. To have lived and endured so much, was I going to let my father die now that we could be able to take a hot shower and lie down? Father, I howled. Father, get up right now. You will kill yourself. And I grabbed his arm and he continued to moan. Don't yell, my son. Have pity on your old father. Let me rest here a little, I beg of you. I'm so tired, no more strength. He had become childlike, weak, frightened, vulnerable. Father, I said, you cannot stay here. I pointed to the corpses around him. They too had wanted to rest here. I see, my son. I do see them. Let them sleep. They haven't closed an eye for so long. They're exhausted. His voice was tender. I howled into the wind. They're dead. They will never wake up. Never. Do you understand? This discussion had continued for some time. I knew that I was no longer arguing with him, but with death itself, and with death that he had already chosen. So his father makes it all the way there and resigns himself to sitting in the snow. He can't go even a couple steps further. The sirens began to wail, alert. The lights went out in the entire camps, and the guards chased us towards the block. In a flash, there was no one left outside. We were only too glad to not have to stay outside any longer in the freezing wind. We let ourselves sink into the floor. The cauldrons at the entrance found no takers. There were several tiers of bunks. To sleep was all that mattered. And when I woke up, it was daylight. That is when I remembered that I had a father. During the alert, I had followed the mob, not taking care of him. I knew he was running out of strength, close to death, and yet I had abandoned him. I went to look for him. Yet at the same time, a thought crept into my mind. If only I didn't find him, if only I were relieved of this responsibility, I could use all my strength to fight for my own survival, to take care of only myself. Instantly, I felt ashamed of myself forever. I walked for hours without finding him, and then I came to a block where they were distributing black, quote-unquote, coffee. People stood in a line, whirled. A plaintive voice came from behind me. Eliezer, my son, bring me a little coffee. I ran toward him. Father, I've been looking for you for so long. Where were you? Did you sleep? How are you feeling? He seemed to be burning with fever. I fought my way to the coffee cauldron like a wild beast, and I succeeded in bringing him back a cup. I took one gulp. The rest was for him. I shall never forget the gratitude that shone in his eyes when he swallowed the beverage, the gratitude of a wounded animal With these few mouthfuls of hot water, I had probably given him more satisfaction than during my entire childhood. He was lying on the boards, ashen, his lips pale and dry, shivering. I could stay with him no longer. We had been ordered to go outside to allow for the cleaning of the blocks. Only the sick could remain inside. We stayed outside for 5 hours and we were given soup. When they allowed us to return to the blocks, I rushed towards my father. Did you eat? No. Why? They didn't give us anything. They said that we were sick and that we would die soon and that it would be a waste of food. I can't go on. I gave him what was left of my soup, but my heart was heavy. I was aware that I was doing it grungily. I was just like Rabbi Elihu's son. I had not passed the test. Every day, my father was getting weaker. His eyes were watery, his face the color of dead leaves. And the third afternoon, we arrived in Buchenwald. Everybody had to go to the showers, even the sick who were instructed to go last. When we returned from the showers, we had to wait outside a long time. The cleaning of the blocks had not been completed. From afar, I saw my father and ran to meet him, and he went by me like a shadow, passing me without stopping, without a glance. I called to him, he did not turn around, and I ran after him. Father, why are you running? He looked at me for a moment, and his gaze was distant, otherworldly, the face of a stranger. It lasted only a moment, and then he ran away. Suffering from dysentery, my father was prostrate on his cot, with another 5 sick inmates nearby. I ran next to him, watching him. I no longer dared to believe that he could still elude death. I did all I could to give him hope. So again, he no longer dared to believe that he could still elude death. He knew his father had no chance at this point. His father was going to die. All of a sudden, he sat up and placed his feverish lips against my ear. Eliezer, I must tell you where I buried the gold and silver, in the cellar, you know. And he began talking faster and faster, afraid of running out of time before he could tell me everything. I tried to tell him that it was not over yet, that we would still be going home, but he no longer wanted to listen to me. He could no longer listen to me. He was worn out, saliva mixed with blood trickling from his lips. He had closed his eyes. He was gasping more than breathing. And so we saw this at another instance as well, when he had failed the first, when he failed his second selection, where he thought that he was going to die. What did he do? He started talking nonstop, right? Trying to pass on all these last little bits of wisdom and knowledge. For a ration of bread, I was able to exchange cots to be next to my father. And when the doctor arrived in the afternoon, I wanted to tell him that my doctor was very ill. Bring him here. I explained that he could not stand up, but the doctor would not listen. And so, with great difficulty, I brought my father to him. He stared at him and then asked curtly, "What do you want?" "My father is sick," I answered in his place. "Dysentery." "That's not my business. I'm a surgeon. Go on, make room for the others." But my protests were in vain. "I can't go on, my son. Take me back to my bunk." I took him back and helped him lie down. He was shivering. "Try to get some sleep, father. Try to fall asleep." His breathing was labored. His eyes were closed, but I was convinced that he was seeing everything, that he was seeing the truth in all things. Another doctor came to the block, and my father refused to get up. He knew it would be of no use. In fact, that doctor had come only to finish off the patients. I listened to him shouting at them that they were lazy, good for nothings. They only wanted to stay in bed. I considered jumping him, strangling him, but I had neither the courage nor the strength. I was riveted to my father's agony. My fathers were aching. I was clutching them so hard to strangle the doctor and the others, to set the whole world on fire. My father's murderers, but even the cry stuck in my throat. And it's at this point I want us to remember the foreword, where we hear about how his father does eventually die, and how, what he did as well. We are going to encounter that here basically immediately. On my return from bread distribution, I found my father crying like a child. "My son, they are beating me." "Who?" I thought he was delirious. "Him, the Frenchman and the Pole, they beat me. One more stab to the heart, one more reason to hate, one less reason to live." Eliezer, tell them not to beat me. I haven't done anything. Why are they beating me?" I began to insult his neighbors, and they mocked me. I promised them bread, soup. They laughed, but then they got angry. They could no longer stand my father any longer, they said, because he no longer was able to drag himself outside to relieve himself. The following day, he had complained that they had taken his ration of bread. While you were asleep? No, I wasn't asleep. They threw themselves on me. They snatched it from me, my bread, and they beat me again. I can't go on, my son. Give me some water. I knew that he must not drink, but he pleaded with me so long that I gave in. Water was the worst poison for him, but what else could I do for him? With or without water, it would be over soon anyways. You at least have pity on me. Have pity on him, I, his only son. A week went by like that. Is this your father? Asked the Blocktus. Yes. He is very sick. The doctor won't do anything for him. He looked me straight in the eye. The doctor cannot do anything more for him, and neither can you. He placed his big, hairy hand on my shoulder and added, listen to me, kid. Don't forget that you're in a concentration camp. In this place, it is every man for himself. And you cannot think of others, not even your father. In this place, there is no such thing as a father, a brother, or a friend. Each of us lives and dies alone. Let me give you a good advice. Stop giving your ration of bread and soup to your father. You cannot help him anymore. And you are hurting yourself. In fact, you should be getting his rations. I listened to him without interrupting, and he was right. I thought, deep down, not daring to admit it, too late to save your old father. You could have 2 rations of food, 2 rations of soup. It was only for a fraction of a second, but it left me feeling guilty. I ran to get some soup and brought it to my father, but he did not want it. All he wanted was water. Don't drink water, eat the soup. I'm burning up. Why are you so mean to me, my son? Water. I brought him water, and then I left the block for roll call, but I quickly turned back. I lay down on the upper bunk. The sick were allowed to stay in the block, so I would be sick. I didn't want to leave my father. All around me there was silence now, broken only by moaning. In front of the block, the SS were given orders. An officer passed between my bunks, and my father was pleading, my son, water, I'm burning up my insides. Silence over there, barked the guard. Eliza, continued my father, water. The officer came closer and shouted to him to be silent, but my father did not hear. He continued to call me. The officer wielded his club and dealt a violent blow to the head. I didn't move. I was afraid. My body was afraid of another blow, this time to my head. My father groaned once more. I heard, Eliza. All I could see that he was still breathing in gasps. I didn't move. When I came down from my bunk after roll call, I could see his lips trembling. He was murmuring something. I remained more than an hour leaning over him, etching his bloody, broken face into my memory. Then I had to go to sleep. I climbed into my bunk above my father, who was still alive. The date was January 28th, 1945. I woke up at dawn on January 29th. On my father's cot lay another sick person. They must have taken him away before daybreak and taken him to the crematorium. Perhaps he was still breathing. No prayers were said over his tomb. No candle lit in his memory. His last words had been my name. He had called out to me, and I had not answered. I did not weep, and it pained me that I could not weep. But I was out of tears, and deep inside me, if I could have searched the recesses of my feeble conscience, I might have found something like free at last. Yeah. So chapter 9. I remained in Buchenwald until April 11th. I shall not describe my life during that period. It no longer mattered. Since my father's death, nothing mattered to me anymore. I was transferred to the children's block, where there were 600 of us. The front was closing in. I spent my days in total darkness with only one desire, to eat. I no longer thought of my father or my mother. From time to time, I would dream, but only about soup, an extra ration of soup. On April 5th, the wheel of history turned. It was late afternoon, and we were standing in the block, waiting for an SS to come and count us. He was late. Such lateness was unprecedented in the history of Buchenwald. Something must have happened. And 2 hours later, the loudspeakers transmitted an order from the camp commandment. All Jews were to gather in the Appelplatz. This was the end. Hitler was about to keep his promise. And again, if you remember, Hitler's promise was the eradication of Jews. The children of our block did as ordered. There was no choice. Gustav, the blockist, made it clear with his club. But to be on our way, we met some prisoners who whispered to us, go back to your block. The Germans plan to shoot you. Go back and don't move.
We returned to our block, and on the way there, we learned that the underground resistance of the camp had made the decision not to abandon the Jews and to prevent their liquidation. As it was getting late and the confusion was great, countless Jews had been passing as non-Jews. The Lagerlast had decided that a general roll call would take place the next day, and everybody would have to be present. The roll call took place, and the Lager commandment announced that the Buchenwald camp would be liquidated. 10 blocks of inmates would be evacuated every day. From that moment on, there was no further distribution of bread and soup, and the evacuation began. Every day, a few thousand inmates passed the camp's gates and did not return. On April 10th, there were still some 20,000 prisoners in the camp. Among them, a few hundred children. It was decided to evacuate all of us at once. By evening, they would blow up the camp. And soon we were herded into the huge Appelplatz in ranks of 5, waiting for the gates to open. Suddenly, the sirens began to scream. Alert. We went back to the blocks. It was too late to evacuate that evening. The evacuation was postponed to the next day. Hunger was tormenting us. We had not eaten for nearly 6 days, except for a few stalks of grass and some potato peels found on the grounds in the kitchen. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the SS took positions throughout the camp and began to herd the last of us towards the Appelplatz. The resistance movement decided at that point to act. Armed men appeared from everywhere. Bursts of gunshots, grenades exploded. We, the children, remained flat on our flat on the floor of the block. The battle did not last long. Around noon, everything was calm again. The SS had fled, and the resistance had taken charge of the camp. By 6 o'clock that afternoon, the first American tank had stood at the gates of Buchenwald. And so, at this point, he leaves Nazi reign, and we start to see the liberation. The war itself does not actually end until September, so there are still lots of Jews who will go a couple months throughout this. Our first act as free men was to throw ourselves onto the provisions. That's all we thought about. No thoughts of revenge. No thoughts of our parents. They don't care if their friends' families are alive. They only care of bread. And even when we were no longer hungry, not one of us thought of revenge. The next day, a few of the young men ran into the Weimar to bring back some potatoes and clothes and to sleep with girls, but still no trace of revenge. 3 days after the liberation of Buchenwald, I became very ill, some form of poisoning. I was transferred to a hospital and spent 2 weeks before life and death. One day, when I was able to get up, I decided to look myself in the mirror. I had not seen myself since the ghetto, and from the depths of the mirror, a corpse was contemplating me. The look in his eyes as he gazed me has never left me.
Did he lose his leg then? No.
He did not lose his leg as far as I'm aware. I'm not 100% certain, but I've seen him walking, so I don't think he lost his leg. In fact, if he would have lost his leg, it would have been in the when he arrived at the camp, and he survived in that camp for a couple months. So that's Knight. He does eventually win a Nobel Peace Prize. We might end up reading or watching that or listening to it, one of them. But that's the novel. So why don't we take our break here? When we come back, we'll digest this a little bit. Okay, so that is Knight. It's like I said, it's a pretty short book there, but it's really deep. And the original was 900 pages, and they have condensed it down as much as they really possibly could. So I did goof up your guys' stuff here a little bit. I completely boggled the order of these. And I've made changes on mine, and I don't remember. Wait, no, yes, I do. Okay, yes, I do. So we're just going to quickly do those edits here. So where yours says chapter 4, so yours originally says chapter 4. This is actually chapter 5. If you just want to quickly edit that stuff. And then the one below that, where yours says chapter 5. This is actually after we read the book. These are all questions we deal with after the book.
So chapter 5 is 6.
Sorry,
So chapter 5 is 6.
the one that says chapter 4 on your book is actually chapter 5. Yeah, so you're looking at those 3 questions there. So that one's actually chapter 5. And then the section below that is actually after the book is over. Sorry, that is my bad. I goofed up on this. I don't know how I did that, but I did it. And there's a couple other changes here. So the next section, which is after the poem. So the one so for you guys, that says chapter 6. That is actually chapter 6. That's correct. I just put the page numbers there. And then below that, it is still chapter 7. All the other chapters below that rather are correct. It's just the page numbers you have to add. So I messed up the first half, but I got the second half right. I got the order there right.
You go down.
Chapter 8 and then chapter 9. And that's it. There's the 9 chapters. So I hope you guys at least enjoyed the book. It's pretty gruesome that like this, it's the worst thing we're gonna read by far. You know, if you were at least interested by it, I really recommend you watch Schindler's List, but you know, there's a billion other novels, books, podcasts, short stories, documentaries, you know, Holocaust especially is very well documented, but Schindler's List, you know, is known as one of the greatest movies of all time. So I really recommend, if you can bear through that, definitely watch it. So what's going to happen today is today is some time for you guys to be able to finish up these questions as best as you can. We'll go through some of them, not all of them as usual. If you do finish those, which I do not think you'll be able to just yet, but if you do, try and finish filling out these theme tracking questions here. If you do finish, try and fill these out here. But again, if you're not able to, that is fine. We'll start going through some of that stuff. We probably won't get through it all today. There will not be a formal essay with this. We will maybe have one more formal essay at the end of the class. It largely depends on time. So there will not be an essay with this. There will be something for it. These questions themselves, as a reminder, are not 4 marks, but they will help you a lot as you go to write through it. So I'll give you guys I don't know, about like 50 minutes or so, 45 minutes to try out some of those questions there. Okay, so just starting to kind of digest this stuff. I'm not going to go through it all. There's not a lot of time, but there's a couple I did want to go through. One of them is in chapter 6. It's when Ellie comes upon the rabbi and his son. And if you recall, this is when they are mid-March and the rabbi kind of falls behind and he loses track of his son and he's trying to find him and stuff. You know, what was the realization that he came upon? He later remembered something after talking to him.
Really seen them before. What?
So it was on page 91. I'm just gonna mention that here. I'm just gonna write the page number here, just in case you want to write about that later. But so on page 91, the realization he comes with is that when he was running, he saw that the son did see his father was running behind. So the son did see that the rabbi was falling behind. And the significance here. So the significance here is that the son saw his father was going behind and kept going anyways. The son was abandoning the father, right? His father was falling behind. His son's in better shape. He's healthier, and he decides that he can abandon his father. And this is after 3 years in the concentration camp, the CC, together. Um, Probably, yeah, we'll probably head on from there. When we talked about number 2 already, I just wanted to take a look here. Oh, let's go to question 6 here. Again, with question 2, actually, I'll just quickly touch upon that one again. With question 2, the Jews were viewed as animals, right? The analogy we got here was throwing coins to peasants and watching them fight over it, et cetera, et cetera.
Page 100.
Is that page 100? Yeah, sure, we'll throw that in there. Page 100. And then on question 6 here. So Ellie mentioned, and this is when they are traveling in the transport car, the world was staying silent. What does this actually mean? The world itself is not literally quiet. It's an analogy, metaphor.
Like they weren't doing anything, but they didn't really know what was happening.
Well, the German citizens did know, though. We saw many examples where the German citizens were unsurprised with seeing these people marching, these people going through training.
What's up with the rest of the world?
But yeah, that's exactly what it is. It does refer to the rest of the world. And so this is kind of a two-parter. So firstly, within Germany, the citizens knew what was happening. So they knew what was happening in these concentration camps. And outside of Germany, it was either unknown, and as they started to liberate camps, because remember, this book starts at the almost near the end of the war. So they didn't know, most didn't know, rather, is a better way of saying that. Most didn't know about the camps and the treatment. And so with chapter 8 here, so chapter 8, they finally arrive at their final camp. They have finally gotten there. And in it, the second they get there, his father is so weak, he's so close to death that what does his father do? His father, sits in the snow. He just sits in the snow beside all the other dead bodies. Sorry, this is page 5. And so how does Ellie react to this? Like, what's his thoughts about this? One of the things he says is, he's trying to bring him to, he's trying to get him to come, right? So Ellie fights to get his father to stand, right? Don't fall asleep. To have lived in, I'll drop the quote in there, sure, why not? To have lived and endured so much. Was I going to let my father die now?
When he was talking to someone, I forget, the doctor.
Oh, that happens later, yeah. But this is right when they first initially get to the camp.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But ultimately, what we know is that Ellie eventually does abandon his father. He does leave. How come? Pretty simply, he was chased out by the guards, right? The siren went off, where you have to go to your block. The guards started chasing in. So he eventually leaves because of the guards. Yeah, we don't have time to go through all of it, but the next morning he he was kind of like, oh right, I do have a father. He was so tired, so exhausted, he just goes to sleep, right? He doesn't have the energy or the capacity anymore to think about his father until he wakes up the next day. And his thoughts are, if only I were relieved of this responsibility. I'll mention that really quickly, but this isn't the main question I want to talk about. I could use my own strength for my own survival. Sorry, is anyone still writing question 1? Sorry, did someone say yes? No? Okay. So on page 107, we talk about this test. I had failed the test. So on page 107, this is where this is mentioned. And so as a quick reminder, this Rabbi Elahu, again, this is the person who was abandoned by his son at the end. He gets abandoned by his son. And on page 107, he says, quote unquote, just like Rabbi Elahu,'s son, I had not passed the test. What is this test? The rabbi's son failed the test, and so does Eli. What is this test they're referring to?
Or something that's gonna treat us all like that.
Yeah, the test is, the test is feeling that the father is a burden, right? Being ready to abandon him. I grudgingly gave him my soup. He did ultimately leave him in the snow, right? Like his father should have died that night, frankly. They endured so much, and at the end, when it came time, he would be willing to abandon him, to let him die. And again, we see through Eli's actions, he does care. He does try and bring his, he does try and keep his father alive, but we see how he feels. The key word here is, how does he feel about it? He does feel his father's a burden. He is acknowledging the fact that, oh, I could take his rations. I'd get two things of bread, 2 things of soup. He doesn't, oh, we got an emergency alert. No. He doesn't actually do it, but again, that's how he feels, which is the test. We'll do 1, maybe 2 more. It's gonna depend on time. Question 6 here, chapter 8. This is, of course, which we've known from the very, very start, when his father gets beat to death by a god. And that's on page 111 and 112. What did Eli do during this moment?
He wants to fight, but he can't, no strength,
Kind
right?
of. That was mentioned right before, to be fair. That was mentioned, I think, a page or 2 beforehand. That was to his his neighbors or something. But this is to the guards. And so let's really kind of recall what's happening here. So Eli's father is, calling his name, right? He wants water. At this point, he's dying of dysentery. If you don't know what that is, that's where you have an infection inside your body. It's essentially fatal. Well, it is fatal. Okay,
For the introduction.
no, no worries. Let's go that way. So his father's calling his name, right? You know, he wants water. Ellie, I want water. Eliza, please, it's all I want is some water. And so what ends up happening here is Ellie chooses to stay in the bunkhouse sick, and the guards end up coming outside. You know, they're annoyed. The guards are annoyed that his father's, you know, keeps groaning and moaning and stuff. And so they start beating him. And so on page 111, he continued, I did not move. I was afraid. My body was afraid of another blow, this time to my head. So Ellie, in this case, was afraid. Specifically, he was afraid of being attacked by the guard. He feared for his own safety. So his first thought is not of his father's safety. His first thought of his own. I'm gonna hide up here, not because it's better for my father, which it probably is. It is probably better for his father if he does sit there and do nothing. But he's sitting there doing nothing because he's afraid for his own safety. Is anyone still ready? I thought there was one more, but I don't remember which one it was. Where is it? I swear there was one more I wanted to do. But I don't remember it. Okay, we'll end it there. We're good. We do have these end of chapter questions, which we will end up going over. These are the really big questions. So where we're kind of doing what we're doing tomorrow is we're tackling the big stuff. What's the big themes? And we're really analyzing the characters as a whole throughout the novel, not just in these sections as we go from camp to train to from safety to not safety, etc. So we'll end it there. Yeah.